Emma looked at her 8-year-old daughter Sophie as she twirled in her pink flower girl dress, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She was thrilled to be part of her Aunt Rachel's wedding. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," Emma said with a warm smile, though her heart clenched just a little. Sophie was adopted, and while she was Emma's entire world, her family had never fully accepted her. Emma was 35 years old and a single mother by choice. 5 years ago, when she first met Sophie at the orphanage, she knew instantly that they were meant to be a family, but her parents and her sister Rachel never shared her enthusiasm. "A Chinese girl?" Rachel had once scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Couldn't you at least adopt someone who almost looks like us?" "Sophie is Korean," Emma had corrected for what felt like the 1000th time, "and she's perfect just the way she is." Rachel's wedding was fast approaching, and the only reason Sophie and Emma had even been invited was because their mother had insisted. Rachel was marrying Daniel, the son of one of the wealthiest businessmen in the city. The day before the wedding, during the rehearsal, Emma noticed something was off. The bridesmaids whispered among themselves, throwing judgmental glances at Sophie. "Rachel," Emma approached her sister during a break, lowering her voice, "is everything okay?" She barely looked at Emma. "Daniel's parents are concerned," she muttered. "They think an adopted Asian girl will ruin the family photos." Emma blinked, trying to process her words. "Excuse me?" Rachel let out an exasperated sigh. "Look, Emma, it's bad enough that you've always been different." A chill ran down Emma's spine. "Different? What do you mean?" Rachel turned to face her fully, her eyes glinting with something cruel. "Oh, come on. Everyone knows you don't look like anyone in our family. Mom and Dad have always felt uncomfortable about it." Her words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. It was true that she never quite looked like them. Her skin was darker, her hair curlier, but she had always chalked it up to recessive genes. "You're being ridiculous," she said, though her voice trembled. Rachel crossed her arms. "Whatever, just keep your adopted daughter out of the way tomorrow." That night, as Emma tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up with troubled eyes. "Mom, why doesn't Aunt Rachel like me?" Emma pulled her close, holding her tight. "Oh, sweetheart, some people just don't know how to see how special you are. The other girl said I'm not a real cousin because I'm adopted." Emma's blood boiled, but she forced herself to stay calm for Sophie's sake. "Family isn't about blood, baby, it's about love." The next morning, they arrived early at the church. Sophie was radiant in her dress, practicing how to toss flower petals, but everything fell apart during the pre-ceremony photos. "The adopted girl can't be in the family pictures," Daniel's mother suddenly declared. Sophie's face fell. "But I'm a flower girl," she protested, her eyes brimming with tears. Rachel's voice was cold as ice. "You're not part of this family, neither of you are." Emma felt Sophie stiffen in her arms as her heart pounded. "What are you saying?" she demanded. Rachel turned to their parents, her lips curling in satisfaction. "Mom, Dad, tell her the truth already." Her parents went pale, their faces stricken with guilt, and then her mother started to cry. "Emma," her father began, but before he could continue, a deep voice echoed from the entrance of the church. "He's right, you were never part of this family." Everyone turned. A tall man around 60, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, stood at the door. His face was like looking at a masculine version of Emma's own. "Who are you?" Rachel demanded, her voice sharp with irritation. The man smiled slightly, but his piercing gaze was locked on Emma. "My name is Thomas Harrison, and Emma is my daughter." A stunned silence filled the church. Emma's mother swayed on her feet before collapsing in a dead faint, while her father, the man she had believed to be her father, went pale as a ghost. "This is ridiculous," Rachel shrieked, her voice rising in hysteria. "You're ruining my wedding." But Thomas Harrison remained calm. He strode toward them, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "I have DNA test results, legal documents, and the full story they've hidden from you for 35 years. Sophie squeezed Emma's hand, her small fingers gripping tightly. "Mom, who is that man?" she whispered. Before Emma could answer, her mother, now fully conscious, let out a strangled cry. "You have no right to be here," she screamed. "We had a deal." Thomas's expression hardened. "The deal," he said coldly, "was that I would stay away until Emma turned 35. She had a birthday last week." Emma's mind was spinning. "Deal? What deal? What are you talking about?" "Perhaps we should discuss this in private," Thomas suggested. "No," Rachel snapped. "This is my wedding. I want you and your so-called daughter to leave now." Thomas turned his gaze on her, and for the first time, Emma saw real fear in her sister's eyes. "Miss," he said evenly, "I am the CEO of Harrison International. Your future father-in-law works for me. Are you sure you want me to leave?" Daniel's parents turned deathly pale. You're Thomas Harrison?" Daniel's mother whispered in shock. Thomas ignored them and looked back at Emma. "Emma," he said gently, "I know this is overwhelming, but your biological mother, my late wife Maria, would have wanted you to know the truth today." Emma's heart pounded. "I don't want to hear any of this," she said, her voice shaking. She scooped Sophie into her arms, turning to go. "Sweetheart, wait." Thomas pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet and held it out to Emma. She hesitated, then took it. The image was of a breathtaking woman with the same curly hair and warm brown skin as Emma's. She was holding a baby. Emma's breath caught. It was like looking in a mirror. "Your mother died just hours after giving birth to you," Thomas explained, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I was shattered. I made the mistake of trusting your nanny, the woman you now call your mother. She offered to raise you as her own. I was drowning in grief. I signed the papers. It was for the best." Emma's adoptive mother cried. "You were a mess, drinking yourself into oblivion." Thomas's eyes burned with fury. "So you stole my daughter? You erased every trace of Maria from her life?" The church filled with hushed murmurs. The wedding had turned into a full-blown scandal. Sophie tugged at Emma's sleeve. "Mommy, he's like us, isn't he?" she whispered. "He was looking for you, just like you looked for me." Her words hit Emma like a revelation. She turned to the family that had raised her, the family that had always made her feel like an outsider. Then she looked at Thomas, whose eyes mirrored hers, whose skin matched hers. Emma exhaled sharply. "Let's go." Rachel let out a bitter laugh. "Of course, just run away. You and your little charity case never belonged here anyway." Emma turned to her one last time, her voice steady. "You're right, Rachel. I was never part of this family." She glanced at Sophie and smiled. "And I am so grateful for that." Thomas took them to a private restaurant where Sophie immediately warmed up to him. She was full of curiosity, peppering him with questions between bites of her ice cream. "So does this mean you're my grandpa?" she asked, her big eyes sparkling with excitement. Thomas chuckled, glancing at Emma for permission. "If your mother allows it, I would love to be your grandfather." Emma took a deep breath. "I need to know everything," she said at last, "from the very beginning." Thomas nodded and pulled a leather-bound photo album from his briefcase. "Your mother Maria was an architect," he began. "We met when her firm was hired to design the headquarters of my company. It was love at first sight." Emma flipped through the pages, staring at pictures of a joyful couple traveling the world, building a life together. "They looked so in love, so happy. When she got pregnant with you, it was the best moment of our lives," Thomas continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. "But there were complications during childbirth." He swallowed hard, his usually steady demeanor wavering. "The doctors, they could only save one of you." Emma's hands trembled as she traced her mother's face in a hospital photo. She was holding a newborn, gazing down at Emma with pure love. "She chose you." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. "I fell apart after she died," Thomas admitted. "I was lost. And in my grief, Margaret, your nanny, the woman you've called mom all these years, took advantage of my vulnerability. She convinced him that he was incapable of raising Emma, that she needed a real family. Margaret already had a daughter but couldn't have any more children of her own. She told him that what she really wanted was to give her daughter Rachel someone to be with, someone to fill the space left by the siblings she would never have." "Why did you wait so long?" Emma asked, clenching her fists. "The legal agreement I signed in my moment of weakness stated that I couldn't contact you until you turned 35, he said bitterly. "For the past 34.5 years, I've been gathering evidence, building a case, but most of all, watching over you from a distance." A shiver ran down Emma's spine. "You watched me?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "I was at your college graduation, sitting in the last row, when you adopted Sophie. I hired private investigators to make sure you were both safe, and when you opened your little bookstore, I was your first customer, though you didn't recognize me." Sophie gasped. "Wait, the man with the sunglasses who buys books every month?" Thomas smiled. "That was me. I couldn't be in your life, but I needed to be part of it in some way." Emma stared at him, the puzzle pieces of her life rearranging themselves in a way that finally made sense. "Wait a minute," she murmured, a memory surfacing. "The loan for the bookstore, the bank approved it so fast." Thomas gave a guilty nod. "Your business plan was solid on its own, but I may have pulled a few strings." Emma's phone vibrated for the 100th time. Calls, messages, all from her adoptive family. She ignored them. "What happens now?" she asked. Thomas leaned back. "That's up to you." His voice was gentle but firm. "Legally, you are my heir. Harrison International will be yours someday. But more importantly, I want the chance to be your father and Sophie's grandfather." "Do I have to decide right now?" "Of course not. Take all the time you need." He hesitated, then reached into his briefcase again, his fingers lingering for a moment before pulling out another envelope. His voice was softer this time, almost reverent. "Your mother left this for you." The letter inside was filled with love and hope, speaking of a mother's dreams for her daughter and the house she had designed, Emma's birthplace. A week later, Emma and Sophie moved in. Thomas helped them transition, giving them space but always making sure they knew he was there. For the first time in Emma's life, she felt like she truly belonged. Her adoptive family made several attempts to reach her in the days after the wedding: missed calls, unread messages, voicemails filled with demands, guilt trips, and desperate pleas. She ignored them all. But Rachel wouldn't let it go so easily. One afternoon, As Emma was restocking shelves in her bookstore, the door burst open. Rachel marched in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, her expression a mix of frustration and barely restrained fury. "You owe me an explanation," she snapped, storming toward the counter. Emma didn't even look up from the books she was sorting. "For what exactly?" "For ruining my wedding," Rachel spat, slamming her hands down in front of her. Emma raised an eyebrow. "The wedding still happened, didn't it?" Rachel's mouth tightened. "Yes," she admitted bitterly, "but not the way it was supposed to. Daniel's parents are furious. Do you have any idea what you've done? They lost major business contracts with Harrison International. They're blaming me for all of it." Emma sighed and placed another book on the shelf. "That's not my problem." Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. "You were my sister." That made Emma pause. She finally met her gaze, her voice steady. "No, Rachel, you never let me be." Something in Rachel's expression wavered, just for a second, but pride held her back from admitting the truth. Instead, she scoffed, spun on her heel, and stormed out, the door slamming behind her. 6 months later, life has taken on a rhythm Emma never thought possible. Sophie has flourished in ways she never imagined. She adores her grandfather. Thomas picks her up from piano lessons, helps her with her homework, and spoils her relentlessly. The other day, he brought home a grand piano, claiming it was a necessary investment in her musical talent. "Grandpa, it's huge," Sophie had gasped, her eyes wide as she ran her fingers across the keys. "You can't expect a true musician to practice on anything less," Thomas said with a playful grin, ruffling her hair. "Their bond is effortless, natural, like they've known each other forever." As for Emma and Thomas, they are learning each other step by step. They meet for coffee, for dinners, for long walks where he tells her stories about Maria, the mother she never got to know. Through his words, she can almost see her, a brilliant, driven woman who loved to sketch on napkins in cafes, who always smelled faintly of cedarwood and jasmine, who hummed under her breath when she worked, lost in her designs. The house Maria designed, the one she never got to raise Emma in, has become their home. At night, when the world is quiet, Emma runs her fingers along the carved wooden banisters, the delicate arches, the thoughtful little details that her mother poured her soul into. She built this house for them, for Emma, and now for Sophie. Framed photographs line the walls, telling their story, Maria holding her newborn daughter, Emma years later holding Sophie in her arms, and now Sophie laughing with her grandfather, 3 generations forever bound together. Sometimes the family we choose, the family that chooses us, becomes more real than the one we were given. Sophie taught Emma that when she adopted her, and now, reconnecting with her father, she understands it completely. As Sophie often says, love makes a family, and after 35 years, Emma finally knows exactly what that means.